I did a survey where I sent the top 100 players, and I didn't send the top 100 players, but about 30 of the high top 50 players. I sent the opportunity to fill out a survey related to superlatives for the 1v1 scene. You guys have probably seen a bunch of stuff like this around. The RL Pro Awards did it recently for the RLCS, where they had a ton of different unique awards. And then I think Johnny actually also did a Player's Choice Awards before that for similar stuff in a previous split. Now, 1v1 doesn't really have splits or anything, and we actually haven't even had a big tournament, but I just wanted to hop on the train of asking players and getting superlatives, but this time specifically about the 1v1 scene. So I'm not calling it the Player's Choice Awards for 1v1. I think if we're going to do that, it'll probably be at a time that makes a little bit more sense, and we'll call it the official awards. For now, I'm just going to show you guys the results of the survey of the guys that I talked to. So let's continue on. Who did I ask? This was ultimately the breakdown, and this might change your opinion on who you voted for. We got a prediction going in chat now that they allow more than 2 predictions in, or more than 2 choices in the prediction. Which one of the players did they vote as number 1? This might help give you an idea. I don't know. Maybe this changes your vote. But 2 South American players responded, 5 North American players, 7 European, and 4 Middle East. I felt like this was actually a pretty decent, coverage of players who play 1v1. I think Europe has more 1v1 players than North America. They probably have the most of all. Middle East has a good amount too as well. And then South America definitely is less represented. So I actually think, even though I ended up inviting tons of people and I was trying to get more responses, that the ones that did respond ended up giving a pretty good overall coverage of the 1v1 scene. So you can see a couple of the names down there at the bottom of people who responded. There's more. We had 18 different responses. Not all of them agreed to have their responses shown publicly. So if they show up in chat, they can mention who they voted for. But if not, we won't be telling them. We'll just be showing the aggregated results of everything. So what do we ask them? What do we ask them before we get into the superlatives here? I asked them who had the best kickoff in the 1v1 game, who had the best aerial game in 1v1, the best ground game in 1v1, who was the most physical, so who relies on bumps, demos the most, while also still being a top player, who's the fastest. I actually threw in who was the slowest as kind of a joke, but 1v1 is one of the things that you can play slow. There's players who play slow, and it's a valid play style. Unlike threes, where I think slower player is almost always a bad thing. You never really want to be a slow player. You can slow the game down, play really, really passive in ones, and still be a good player and be a slower player. So almost took that category out, but in the last moments, as the last few results came in, the players seemed to at least kind of decide on who they thought was the slowest player. But before that, not a single person agreed. So everyone had a different opinion on that one. But also, the best region is included. So I just put all the regions from RLCS in there. They could have voted for any of them, and they picked what they thought the best region for 1v1 was. And then, probably what I think the most interesting thing of the survey is I had all of them list their top 10. So their top 10 1v1 players, and then we averaged them out to get the Player's Choice top 10. And that's what you guys voted on right now, or you're voting on right now, who they picked as number 1. We will reveal later, and we'll do it towards the end. I thought we could pick just best player, like an MVP is how most of these other awards do, but that's not really how 1v1 works. And I just thought it'd be simpler, more fun to just do all 10, as many people as we could get. So let's keep going. First things first, best kickoff. And as we start to reveal these, feel free to give your guesses in chat or your opinions in chat on who you think they agreed upon. If the panel was not able to get any sort of consistency, meaning that they couldn't get like 3 or 4 votes on a single person, then I was just going to throw the category out. But ultimately, every category did have at least some sort of consensus. Seeing some KB ones. Moxie. Toxic says himself. Just so you know, players who filled it out were not able to pick themselves on anything. So it does slightly hold them back. Were you allowed to vote for yourself? You were not allowed to vote for yourself. Feer? Are you saying Feer has the best kickoff, or are you needing to ask me something, Reed? So, I think chat actually could have done a pretty good job with this one because this one had a 3-way tie. We have a couple different ties. This is the biggest tie. This was a perfect 3-way tie between 3 players, and I think we're going to agree with all of them, which is Toxic, KV1, and Moxie. So everyone across the board these are probably the only few people who got even multiple votes, but neither one of them were able to beat each other out. They all got 4 votes. Toxic, KV1, Moxie, split across the board. These are the 3 guys who get talked about as having the best kickoffs. I would say Toxic and KV1 get talked about even more. And I don't know if Moxie wants me to reveal or not. I think he did say that I can talk about his own picks. But I know Toxic just joked that he would vote for himself. Moxie also wanted to vote for himself for this one, I'm pretty sure. And then KV1, I didn't talk about KV1. I don't know if KV1 thought he had the best kickoffs or not. But these players believe they had the best kickoff, and it is agreed upon by the pros. A cross-region showdown? Yeah, only North America doesn't have a good kickoff player. I think North American's potential kickoff player was Daniel. I want to say Daniel might have gotten a couple votes, but not enough to tie these guys. So if you had to pick a North American kickoffer, it does seem like it would be Daniel. So we move forward. I think I just need to click here and it'll take me forward. Best aerial game. I have not seen Moxie versus 2 Nextobots. I've been really interested in that because I know Fairy Peak played him as well, right? And Fairy Peak got to win a little bit faster than Moxie did. Best aerial game. 1v1 is a game that can be played in the air, on the ground, fast, slow. There's a lot of different variants. And there are certain players, as we've watched, who love forcing the aerial game, who maybe every time they have a possession, they're going in the air. So I asked them, who's the best at it? Who's the best at it all? Chat seems to be pretty in agreement, and I think you guys agree with the players as well, because the players had Joria's with a runner-up, which I'd say is chat's runner-up, just based off of reading what chat has to say. AJ. No surprises here. In fact, I think the players overall, as we go through this, have a good list, man. I think the reality is these players know what they're talking about, and averaging them all out kind of pulls out any crazy opinions. But AJ was close. Joria's gets the win. Best aerial game. Probably one of the most exciting players. You're so smart. Daniel is runner-up. No, I think Daniel got a couple votes, but AJ had the edge over him. They were not tied in runner-up. The players believe AJ has the edge. So, we can continue on. We could chat about these more. I don't want to run through them super quick. But now we move to ground game. And without even thinking about who they put down, when I think best ground game, I do think of the Middle East guys. The Middle East players in general are probably one of the first players I think of when I think ground game. They have such a special ground game and seem to be able to crush more than others. I'm just realizing now I could have asked who's got the best flicks, because flicks are a big part of 1v1, much a bigger part than they are in any other game mode, I'd say. And I did not put that on the list. Probably should have. So that's probably getting rolled into ground game, I would say. My guess is the players who noticed there was no flick game or flicks in the categories probably included that as part of ground game. But there is no runner-up. For this ground game, everybody agreed and nobody else was able to get even a couple votes, I don't think. So your best ground game 1v1er, according to these players, is Khaled. Chat knows. Chat did a good job. We saw some Moxie, some Appjack, a bunch of different of the Middle East players. Rawas, maybe getting some votes out of there from chat. He's just a rank grinder. We actually asked who is the best ranked player. That might be the next thing that we asked him, because Show match players and ranked players, I feel like there's a bit of a difference between them, but that actually comes later. Khaled, he is picked as having the best ground game. And I want to say he's expanded his aerial game, though. He used to play during his absolute peak prominence when he was winning tournaments. He was super ground focused, I would say. But he's honestly become a much more hybrid 1v1 player every time I've watched him as of late. Is Khaled still playing ones much? He is staying high in the leaderboards. He's always top 5 and pushes for top 1 every once in a while. But he is not playing very many show matches. His only recent one that I can think of is against Moxie. And that one went to game 7, I believe. Or it might have been a best of 5. So game 5. And I think Moxie did win it. You missed the line, Blaze Fix. Did you ask who the most toxic player is? I didn't. I didn't think of that. There's a ton of more things we can do, and we'll improve this in the future. But I did just want to show these results. That's why this is the survey. This is a survey. This is a nice feeler. And we'll get even more detailed stuff if we ever want to. We'll do it after a big tournament. If we get a big tournament that's across the board, maybe gets, all regions involved, I think that'll be the best time after that to give away awards. But the thing with 1v1 is there's a little bit less mystery. Because there's only one player, player success and team success are exactly the same thing. So it does make these kind of things a little bit easier to pick. Whereas, individual players can shine on teams that do poorly, and they almost need to be recognized through awards like this. But anyways, we move on. Most physical. Now, this one I had no idea. I'm really interested to see what chat thinks, because I had no idea. This is probably the only one that I couldn't have guessed what the players were going to pick, and I don't know who I would pick. As somebody who watches tons of 1v1s, some players bump and demo. I don't even really notice. In fact, the biggest thing that I notice is YouTube comments hate players who do this. And that's the only way I even recognize that players do it a lot, is because somebody in the comments will be, all that person's good at doing is bumping and demoing. And I'm like, I didn't even realize they're doing it that much more than anybody else. But it seems like you guys are also a little bit more mixed as well. You actually had no idea who to put this. The funny thing is, Toxic just said he had no idea who to put for this. But this is probably the most agreed upon result. The player that the players picked blew away, I think, almost any other pick in terms of confidence. Maybe Jorya's aerial game. Jorya's aerial game, I think, was pretty agreed upon. But maybe the next most agreed upon result out of any of this was this one. And I didn't even realize it, because I wouldn't have picked this player. I didn't notice anything in their game that was more physical or not. But we shall reveal. Some of you guys said it, but also you guys said almost every name. We do see some Reddles in there. I think the reason why Reddles probably didn't get picked is because he didn't play as much EU or is not as prevalent. Apparently, Jack was widely agreed upon as the most physical in terms of bumps and demos. So there you go. I mean, I haven't watched a ton of apparently Jack games recently. I know he uploads a ton of videos on YouTube. Maybe these other top ranked players are watching Jack on YouTube. I doubt it. I mean, they could be, but I think mostly they're getting it from playing him. And apparently they do not like Jack bumping him. Bump merchant confirmed. Yeah. I got to go tell all my fans, because I swear the fans actually, the person who gets the most crap for being a bump merchant on my YouTube comments is Khaled. I think Khaled gets the absolute biggest heat for only being a bump and demo kind of guy. And I don't know. I don't even know if he got any votes for this. In fact, yeah, not a single vote. Tons of people got an individual vote. The only other player to get 2 votes, which is kind of questionable. 2 votes is barely even a trend, is AJ. AJ got a couple votes. Oh, it looks like Luis P got a couple votes. But other than that, people agreed on apparently Jack. Why'd you ask 7 EU players? These results are so biased. Well, we asked 5 North Americans and 2 South Americans. So we asked 7 people who queue on US East. So your biggest problem that you probably have is that we have 4 Middle East players who also queue on EU. So there's a few more people who queue on EU versus US East, but I asked way more North Americans. So if you're upset that North America doesn't have more representation, know that I asked and got no response from way more North Americans. And in fact, this has always been a trend with everything that I do and I run. The EU Middle East guys have a way higher response rate and acceptance rate than the North American guys. And I almost wouldn't even want to say it. When I first had it happen to me, I was like, oh, just maybe this one time. I've been doing this for 2 years now. It's a trend. The EU players, the Middle East players, way higher acceptance and response rate than the North American players. It's just the way it is. So anyways, we continue. We continue on to what I believe is the best ranked player. The best ranked player, I'm trying to remember if this was a tie. I think it was a win with a runner-up. Let me just do a real quick double check. Yeah, it looks like it's a win with a runner-up. A win with a runner-up. Chat, who are the two people? Come on. Who are the two people? We know who the two people are, don't we, chat? One of them won, and one of them was the runner-up. Just like you'd expect. Everybody's saying the two. Moxie is actually a good additional pick. Moxie's not on here. He has been dominating ranked recently, but he is not historically as dominant as both Khaled and Jack are. So the players picked Khaled, the toughest ranked player to play against, with Jack being number 2. Apparently Jacked for sure. For the sake of the North Americans, right? Because people might be saying, oh no, only the people who queued EU are going to get picked. Anybody who answered a North American person, it looks like First Killer probably had the lead in North America, just barely. But everyone was in agreement, and I think North Americans answered Jack and Khaled as well. They got enough votes that there's no way just the EU region was picking them. They got picked by the quorum, as you could say. Historically, you would say that the French geezer with the Batmobile. I think you got to go pretty far back. Fairy Peak hasn't been playing 1v1 on the leaderboard for sure, like in a long time. Or when he does, he doesn't push quite to the top. Khaled owns the leaderboard. I think that's right. I think Khaled does own the leaderboard. Everybody else has had stints where they kind of fall off. Khaled never falls. He's always around there. I've never seen him not in the top 5. Whereas Jack even stopped playing for a while, dropped out. Moxie is a little bit more recent, although he's been up there since he's probably gotten there. But Khaled, consistent. One thing is always the same. He's near the top. Even when he's not playing show matches, he keeps himself high on the ones leaderboard. So, this moves us on to the fastest player. We got fastest and slowest. I wasn't sure who's going to be picked for this either. A lot of them were very simple. A lot of them were so easy, you could maybe have argued that we could have not included the category, but it is nice to see what the players say, just in case they're going to have any sleeper. But who is the fastest 1v1 player? I don't know if I'm confirmation biasing because I know all the answers, but chat is actually doing a pretty good job of getting an idea of who the players picked. They got some of it wrong, but I would say maybe my eyes are just searching for the right answers. You guys are doing a pretty decent job, and I think that is maybe just the reality that ones is a little bit easier to predict than a team game where you're trying to pick out individual players. But let me make sure. I think this one was a tie. This is another one of our ties. Not a ton of ties, but this one was tied between a Middle East player and a North American player. And those two are... I should have gotten a drum roll sound. Wait a second. The content could still happen. Imagine. Drum roll sound. Yo, Zero. Thank you for the Prime for 2 months.
Great content, man.
Appreciate it. And now look at it. I'm doing even more for you for the content. We're going to get a drum roll. I've never... Hey! The content. Look at that. TRK and First Killer. TRK and First Killer.
A month ago, I came out with a video.
Now we're just auto-playing into Ludwig videos. But TRK, First Killer, both getting a decent amount of votes. This was one that the players weren't super sure on. They didn't get tons and tons of votes. But yeah, TRK 511. I think he stays decently high in the ranked leaderboard. He may not be playing as much 1v1 show matches, but he did play in the swamp. He played in the swamp and he looked really, really good in the swamp. I'll be honest. He looked amazing until all of a sudden in the single limb bracket play, he just couldn't handle Killiers out of nowhere. But TRK and the first killer. I think we all know why first killer's there. Everybody in unison for the North American votes and the South American votes as well. Where's the channel points prediction reward? That's coming all the way at the very end. If you bet, I think the predictions are already over because it's been 30 minutes, but that was for who they picked as the number one, because I do think that's probably the most interesting portion of all this. Anyways, we now have the slowest player. Slowest player was a category I almost removed, and the reason why is because nobody could agree. Everybody had a different pick. Who plays the slowest, most calculated? Almost no one said the same player, with the exception of 3 votes for this one player. 3 different people thought he played the slowest. And you know what? Surprisingly, I think Flakes just had not been around long enough, because this does seem like a category that Flakes would win. Flakes just hasn't been playing enough recently, I guess, is why he didn't get picked. Chat is actually saying scrub a lot. Not a single one of these players said scrub. We have some players, a lot of different players that aren't in the rest of these votes. People did reach out and kind of think of, more edge case players. But ultimately, the guys who are the best are going to end up getting a couple extra votes. And to no surprise, they picked Khaled. So I think they picked Khaled to say he has the best ground game. I think ground game is frequently associated in 1v1 as almost a slow play. But Khaled is a guy who also loves early challenges, which I would say are not indicative of playing slow. But for the most part, I think it's important to remember this one was one that the players couldn't really agree on, to the point where I almost removed the category, but there was a little bit of agreement saying Khaled was the slowest player. So, chat, which region's the best? Which region's the best is a discussion that's had a lot. And can you believe that this is probably the one that is probably the most biased? Because we had 7 EU players respond, 5 North Americans plus 2 South Americans. So ultimately 7 players who are queuing US East, and then 4 Middle East players. So we divided up the regions based on the RLCS region. So I included APAC, SSA, all of them. And they all picked. What do we think, chat? EU or Middle East? If it's not, it's rigged. And 1v1 is Middle East. Not NA for sure. EU or Middle East. Only 3 regions got votes. And I think you guys know which 3 regions got votes. OCE for sure. OCE was an option. Nobody voted for it. Where are the drums? All right, you want another drums? Another drum roll? Europe, Middle East, then North America. And you know what? I agree. I think this is probably right. I think this is pretty accurate. With honestly, they could go almost any way. But I do want to say that North America is super top heavy. And I don't think Europe or Middle East are quite as top heavy. Middle East, maybe you could compare, is also pretty top heavy. But ultimately, there's enough top players that I think they probably edge out North America. And then Europe is so deep. It's got some of the best players and it's super deep. It's hard not to have Europe being number one. But North America did get put behind Middle East, which I think it's tough. That one's tough. I don't know. The North Americans don't commit to it as hard. One day we'll have to see a LAN. One day when we do a 1v1 LAN, we'll be able to just sort this all out. But until we do a 1v1 LAN, it'll be tough. OMG, Americans saying EU is better. I don't think I'm like maybe the rest of North Americans. But even then, I think people have to be able to agree. North America, while they're near the bottom, I also think they don't really care for it as much. Not to say like we don't care, Omega Law. That's why we're at the bottom. But I think it's just the reality. Someone should host a big 1v1 tourney at Worlds. I wish there was a way to do that. I wish there was a way that made sense, because a bunch of the top 1v1 players are going to be playing in Worlds. So you'd have to like host it before or after, and I don't know. It'd be cool. NA better in LCS EU, better at ranked ones. NA was only just recently better at our LCS. You know, we got one major going for us, but we did dominate there. Stupid people thinking it's all around. It's 1v1, and be honest, this is correct for 1v1. Oh yeah, this is not all around. This is just 1v1. All of their results were in the context of 1v1 for sure. All right, I think that brings us to our top 10. Our top 10, which is going to be a very interesting thing to reveal. I'm trying to think if I can get some kind of background. I'm so used to not having, always having something on in the background. So it's like eerie to not have music. But don't forget, Yahaha last seed, your Middle East beat it EO top NAC. True. But that is also in cross servers. So Evo had to play on 80 ping when he's not used to it, and Yahya got to play on his home ping, which is something that's just always going to hang over people's heads until they don't have that excuse anymore. They're on a LAN. So I think a better argument or a better look at the top of EU and North America is the couple recent show matches at the major that Johnny did with Daniel and Jorez and Jack and AJ. I think that's a great example of the top, because both those games were ultra close, just barely won by the EU player. And to me, that's a sign of the fact that they're basically matched, right? I've talked about this before, but if you're going to have an OT game 5 or whatever, those guys are evenly matched. You got to give a nod to whoever wins it, but you can't sit there and say they're a million times better than the other player. Sometimes watching the game, you can see in context that maybe they're better. You know, maybe a couple of games were stolen by the player who lost. But anyways, I think those are pretty even. Then Scrub played Reddles, and I think Scrub destroyed Reddles. I think that might be an example of maybe how EU's deeper. But either way, those games were amazing. So here's how I did the Player's Choice Top 10. Here's how I did it. I had them all rate from 1 to 10, their top players. I didn't give them any guidance. I didn't give them names to pick from. They just got to write them in. They all typed them different ways, and I all made sure that I recollected them all and fixed all the spelling. So I thought there's a couple different ways I could score this. I could give points to players who got put first, like if they got put first, give them 10 points for that person's submission, and then 9 all the way down to 1. And if you didn't get scored on, you get 0. I thought you could maybe weight the top few picks more, because I'd say top 1, 2, 3 players, probably something that everyone's really thinking hard about. And then as they get towards the end, they don't really care. But no matter what I did, I felt like I was affecting the results if I did that. And I'm not a player. So ultimately, what I settled on was the simplest one, because all the different ways weren't really shifting it around that much anyways, which is you got 10 points for getting a vote in first, 9 in second, third gets 8, etc., all the way down. And then average highest score over all submissions is how these got rated. So, of course, we're going to start from low to high. Of course, we start first with number 10. In fact, you just made me so worried about it. I'm like 99% sure that I started with number 10, but now I just want to make sure. Yeah, I did. I did start with number 10. So, one more thing to talk about before we get into this is there were 3 different tiers, I would say. 3 different tiers in the results from these guys' answers. Tier number 1 is people who don't show up on the list at all, or the first tier I'm going to talk about, the people who aren't going to show up on the top 10. And I actually didn't do any honorable mentions, and the reason why is because there's a good jump between everybody who wasn't in the top 10 and the person who got number 10. So there's a bunch of different players who aren't going to be listed who got some votes, but because there's such a big jump, I couldn't decide where I end the honorable mentions, so I either have to list out 15 people, like all of the top 1v winners, or just say, you know what, screw it, no honorable mentions. So no honorable mentions. The 10 are the 10 by a good amount, and we'll get to it later, but the top 5 have a huge jump over 6 through 10. So the top 5 were widely agreed upon as the top 5, and 6 through 10 were much farther behind. There's a difference between 6 and 5 is almost as big as the difference between, 5 to the end. So keep that in mind. 2 tiers. First tier 10 through 6, and then a fully agreed upon tier by the players of 5 through 1 are the 5 best players. So now we shall start. Number 10 is Rawas. Rawas is the agreed upon number 10. I want to say that recent memory, if I was making my list, I might have Rawas a little bit higher. Rawas has looked really good. He's looked like probably the second best player in Middle East at the times. The problem is he hasn't really gotten a ton of wins. He got a win in Next Gen, but whenever he's playing in other games, Fahad was able to beat him out whenever he went up against him, and then he's always lost to Khaled. So he's always been the third best, and he didn't get a chance to play TRK. TRK doesn't play too super often, but having to play from the maybe third or fourth best player in your region means it's going to be hard to get highly rated ever, even though I think he is maybe working his way up higher on this list. Is this all-time or currently? I just said who are the best players right now. So currently, I asked them who are the top 10 players right now, not of all time. So Rawas, number 10. Number 9, KV1. KV1, down this low. We'll get into this later, but I am going to show you everybody who got at least one first place vote. So if you got a first place vote, I'll have a little indicator on that at the end once we get to the top 10, because it's always interesting. I don't know if you guys watch like AP polls for college basketball. Who is a player who people think is worthy of number 1? Seems like something worth noting. And KV1 actually did get a number 1 vote. He finishes at 9th. So in general, the players maybe not as in love with KV1's abilities as the player who voted him number 1. But he has been improving. And I think the fact that he's in South America is the reason why he falls this low, if you ask me. Of course, we can't see what the players have to say or why they ever put KV1 as low as they did. But I have a feeling if he got to play more in EU or even on the same ping North America, we would have a higher KV1. Probably no one from NA voted for him. No one in NA was probably the ones who have the best chance voting for KV1, but maybe we're talking about Rawas. Maybe that comment came out of Rawas. Well, I'll show you at the final slide, guys, by the way, is all of them revealed. But number 8 for the Player's Choice Top 10, TRK 511. And you guys maybe saw this coming. He did get voted as the fastest player in 1v1. And while I feel like he hasn't played a ton of 1v1 recently, he did play 1v1. He did play the Swamp. So, that is maybe arguably the biggest 1v1 tournament in recent memory. So for that reason, you might include him in 1v1 stuff. But to be fair, I don't know how much other 1v1 he's playing. He's definitely a top tier. And in fact, he's always been the player that the Middle East players, ever since, Daniel and Khaled were playing each other, they say TRK is the best. I remember talking to Khaled and saying, having him trying to set up that Daniel game and him telling me, well, TRK is the best Middle East player. Are you sure you don't want to set Daniel and TRK up? And sounds like they agree now. Middle East players still think TRK 511 is the best 1v1 player. And for good reason. He was dominating Swamp until all of a sudden he tried to have dud of a game. It came off of, I think, a previous show match and some scrims. So maybe that one bad result was due to, fatigue. But either way, the players voted him number 8. So did anybody vote TRK, by the way? I want to look at the predictions because we have a prediction going right now for who got number 1. Can't remember if we included TRK. Because as players show up, that will be people who got it wrong. You know what I mean? You put Jory as number 1. Well, number 7 is Moxie. Number 7 is Moxie. Moxie winning the Swamp recently in the EU, but in a tournament that is not quite stacked because it didn't have Jack, Khaled, or Jorias. So the top 3 players usually, now I'm not saying that's how it's going to go here for the players list, but lots of people talk about them as some of the top players in the region. None of them played. Fahad and Rawas did play, though. And Moxie ended up winning that and then also beating Khaled in a show match after. So top player for sure. Player's going to put him at 7. He's also dominated ranked recently. Before Wisty took over as 1. I think Moxie was the one holding 1 before that. Oh, I accidentally hit space. We'll go to number 6. AJ. AJ number 6. So this is the final player in the top 10 who is very separate from the top 5. AJ does get the nod. North American player, winning a good amount of tournaments, always performing well in everything that he does, but never having the edge over First Killer. He did beat Daniel recently in the show match they've had in the past month or so, but they've also played like years ago in which Daniel won. So AJ has the edge over him in recent memory, but not a ton of 1v1 from the North Americans in general. There hasn't been too many opportunities. AJ lost to First Killer twice in the Swamp, so that could have been an opportunity to push himself higher on this list if he could have beat him. First Killer just crushed, absolutely dominated in that event. So now we move on to number 5, the first in the top echelon. This is a different tier of player according to the players, and that's Daniel. Daniel, number 5. The players thinking that Daniel is above AJ. They know the recent match between them two was a loss for Daniel, I believe 3-1, but that does not change their overall opinion on where Daniel lands in the top 10. Almost everybody placing him higher than they did AJ. So much so that there's a huge gap. I can't stress this enough. Lots of space between AJ and Daniel, according to the players. Daniel plays ones? Oh, man, you're a new Daniel fan. You actually didn't know Daniel grinds ones? Yeah, he was a ones grinder when he was 14 years old. Before, actually, not even, when he's more like he was 13 years old is when he's grinding it the most. But right when he turned 14, he kept playing, and then there's almost a year before he really played it at all. And then he turned 15 and joined the RLCS. So, chat starts to think they know the top 4, but will the top 4 be in an order that you expect? Any guessers? Any guessers for who comes up next at number 4? Everyone knows EU was the best region for a really long time, but NA has drawn even and gone back and forth as who's best. You guys, there are some debates going on that I haven't been able to follow. Khaled, Jack, Joriez, nobody said who it actually is. Which is 3 consecutive North American players. First Killer at number 4. First Killer has had historically tough games against the guys from the other regions, the times that they have played them. Never on LAN. As far as I'm aware, they have never gone to the same location and played on LAN. Only very frequently have 1v1 LAN games happened. All the way back in 12 Titans, I think. That's when 12 Titans 2, they got everybody on LAN, I want to say. Then the recent show matches were on LAN. Other than that, at all the other majors, I don't think they really did too many 1v1 games between players on the same ping. So First Killer had instead only had to play his games cross-server, which has not gone well for him. Who's to say if that has changed now? But the players don't seem to think so. They think he's still on the outside looking in of the top ones players, despite his complete, utter dominance of North America. Nobody came close in the most recent event. Daniel wasn't in it, but AJ, Evo, I think Lineblaze was in this as well. A ton of other top ones players were in, and nobody even left a dent. Nobody left a dent on First Killer, but that doesn't put him past number 4. According to the players, keep in mind, this is all what they picked. And I would say we had a decent shift across the board in terms of regions. I could have tried to get a ton more North American players, but hey, like I said, you got to get those guys to respond because I can't. So that brings us to number 3. Anybody who bet First Killer, how many points were just lost on First Killer? How many people? First Killer was number 1. First Killer had the most votes in chat, most points bet on him being number 1 in chat. Followed by Joriez, then Jack, then Khaled. So presumably those are the people who are left, but we'll see. So we move on to number 3. Number 3 is Khaled. Khaled at number 3. I forgot the drum rolls. I should have done it. But Khaled, the Middle East player, comes in at number 3. He's found himself in the top 3 for a long time. And maybe hasn't had enough recent results to argue for first or second. He's constantly dominated ranked leaderboard. But I don't know what tournament he's last played in. What's the last ones tournament that Khaled played in? Did he play in Just Win? I think he did play in Just Win, but I don't think he made it very far. And then he ended up not playing in the Swamp. And other than a couple show matches, one against Dead Monster and one against Moxie, does anybody know of when Khaled has played recently? Crazy that he's a ranked merchant and is top 3. Yeah, I think he's mostly just played ranked recently. And I'm totally down to be proven wrong. But I think, if anything, maybe it's a legacy vote. Players know Khaled's the best man, and he hasn't been focusing on it. He's been focusing on RLCS and not really 1v1. So has he, given the opportunity to play some tough 1v1 again, some time to prepare for it? I think we'd all expect him to be around this same range anyways, and certainly the players do. But hey, this is a joke. Khaled hasn't done anything recently. Hey, it's top 100 players, specifically like top 50 for the most part. Don't look at me. Feer would like to tell you, who would you like to tell? Wait, would you like to tell what you would change on this list? I'll get into that later. I think it's a pretty good list overall, honestly. So here's the big reveal for number 2, because this is the players or the prediction. Really, it's going to give away. I think if we mention who number 2 is, everyone's going to know who number 1 is. So put your messages in chat so I can see how many different 7s or 1s or maybe 5s. And nobody bet 5. Nobody bet Fahad. Who'd you guys have? I want to see who's about to win or lose some money. Jory is 2, Jack 1. So keep this in mind. Before I get into this, Jack filled out the survey. Therefore couldn't vote for himself, which is tough. You lose some points for that. But there was somebody who also did not include Jorias. And they didn't include Jorias to the point where I actually messaged them just in case. I said, hey, just want to be sure, you didn't include him on purpose, right? Or not on purpose or not on purpose. They said, I did not include him on purpose. So nothing was changed there, which helps because Jorias didn't fill it out. So Jorias couldn't have voted for himself had he filled it out. So a couple different forums didn't have either one of them on, which I would say neutralizes it. So our number 2 is Jorias. Jorias at number 2. The players picked Jorias, the non-ranked grinder, the man you'll never catch in a ranked 1v1 game, at number 2, which of course means that your number 1 is Jack. Jack. No, the drum rolls. I'm sorry. I'll throw them now. Jack, number 1. Anybody who voted Jack, you were right. The players picked Jack. And by a slight margin, by a decent margin, but a slight margin, players picked Jack at number 1. Jack, Jorias. So what is our top 10? Here's our top 10. I'll show you all of them at once. This is the Player's Choice top 10 for 1v1. And I think it's a pretty good list. The parentheses that I have on players' names are votes that they got to be number 1. So if somebody voted them as number 1, then you see a number next to their name. Jack got 5 votes as number 1. But the reason why he's over Jorias is because overall people rated him higher than they did Jorias. People who didn't vote Jorias number 1 were putting him lower. First Killer getting some first place votes. And TRK, TRK, KB1, some surprising, maybe top 1 votes, but not really. I think you can make an argument. I certainly know you can make an argument for KB1. But just because I haven't seen TRK playing too much recently, and the one tournament he did play, he fell out. maybe I wouldn't have put him at number 1, but the players did. So, some of these players did agree. By the way, chat, I think the player who put KV1 number 1 did say I could tell what his results were. And I think he's guessable. Chat, I think you can guess who put KV1 number 1 if you think about it. Any guessers in chat for who said KV1 is number 1? Actually, I see where you guys are coming with a couple of your guesses, but chat is right, but not as right as I thought they would. So the player who voted KV1 number 1 is the player who has most recently played KV1 on LAN. Played KV1 on LAN, found out how good he was, and said, screw it. That guy's the best player in the world. Moxie had KV1 at number 1. He's like, I saw it firsthand. he couldn't resist. I don't know if you guys knew, he played a LAN for like the Danone Cup recently, and the grand final was a best of 5 between Moxie KV1, and KV1 swept it 3-0. And Moxie walked away saying, I just played the best player in the world. How is Joy's number 2? He literally doesn't play ranked or do anything in show matches. He literally just got swept. Listen, I don't make the rules. By the way, this survey was thrown out before the most recent show match of Joy's versus Oski. So people are incredibly, recent bias. People have tons of recency bias, but they did this before Joy's lost to Oski.
Feer 7.
Yo, Virgil, thank you for the 5 months. So had this survey been given out after Joyez lost to Oski, maybe he would have fallen. I don't know. But dig top 2 players. Top 2 players in 1v1. There's a difference between being a top 2 player in 1v1 and being a top 2 player in 3v3.